Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another session of Ironside Take30 with the Data Advisor. And today's topic is data best practices in moving analytics to the cloud. So in today's agenda, we have why there's necessity for cloud, the best practices of moving analytics, and two of the most important questions that we always hear from our customers: cost, what would it cost me, and what's the security in the cloud. So just two separate topics on those as well in the best practices. And these are our agenda for the next few weeks as well. We'll be happy if you join most of them or all of them. Before we dive into the contents of today, let me tell you a little bit about Ironside. And this is our mission statement here. We help clients use data to make better business decisions. And we have expertise in all these capabilities that you see around here. We have advisory capability as well as deep experience in design, building, and deploying of data warehouse, visualization and BI reports, as well as in data science. We also, as part of this cloud implementation, we do have experience in all of these capabilities. We also partner with a lot of these premier technologies and partners, as you can see here. And again, my name is Dipankar Dasgupta, and I'm a senior consultant with Ironside. And we also have Dean Reinhardt and Mike Wilson, and I'll have them introduce themselves when they are talking about their slides. So getting into the best practices, but before, just to set the background, why was there a need for a cloud data warehouse or a database? So as you can see from the picture down here, you must have saw, heard, or experienced or worked on any of these technologies below, which are now mostly called the legacy databases. And one or more of these pain points listed here was why most of our customers look for migration in the cloud. So it could be like they could not scale in terms of storage or compute. And we have heard so many times from our DBA infrastructure, oh, we don't have that, we can't expand our storage, or there is nothing we can do about this bottleneck. Then there is limited concurrency, like when there is reports running, the ETL jobs cannot run. There is contention there. We have to, like for provisioning any of these legacy databases, there was huge investment cost, which is the CapEx, and you have to reserve a large capital. And then there was not only like capital, there was time as well. It took weeks and months to provision a new environment. And there was always that maintenance of the hardware and the infrastructure that went with it. And like with this big data that's coming in, data coming in large volumes, velocity, and variety of data, like both structured and unstructured data, these legacy databases weren't able to handle these. And all these, one or more of these, caused performance bottlenecks. And that's why the customers were looking for a better implementation on the cloud. And this is just a diagram of our legacy architecture, wherein different sources were brought into this enterprise warehouse, and separate data marts were also built just for specific, maybe a financial data mart, maybe a sales data mart, and all that for specific user reporting requirements. Also, because the same database could not hold maybe semi-structured data, there were separate data lakes for that. And this is a very generalized cloud data warehouse architecture, wherein different sources, maybe RDMSs or even files, semi-structured files, can all be ingested, maybe from the native data warehouse perspective or use of third-party tools. and they are kind of put into a storage area, which sometimes, most of the times now is called a data lake. And from the data lake, it's transformed to a more layer wherein there are more transformations happening into a more enterprise data warehouse. And from there, we store it in a star schema model, which is mostly consumed for BI and reporting purposes. So below here are some of the common cloud data warehouses, just at least some of them here. So to get into the meat of today's content, the best practices. And first and foremost, we first go into customer understanding their pain points. Nothing happens without understanding why the customer, or what is the current problem in their technology stack, why they want to move to the cloud, or they might be interested in something new that technologically was not possible right now with their legacy systems. So we deep dive into the customer's technology landscape, understand their data warehouse environment, account for all the sources and the various data points, even the new ones they might want to bring in, and understand the reporting needs. And as I mentioned, the security always comes up. We give importance to the security, and Mike is going to talk about this. I'm not going to talk more about security. But after understanding all of these, deep diving into these, we whiteboard under our understanding of the current environment, and we also draw or whiteboard the future state so that the customer understands what is the current state, what is the future state going to look like. And there are cost estimates that come out of this, as cost and sizing that come out of these deep dive sessions. And we would like to get a sign off before we do any kind of implementation so that the customer is on board with us. Then there are some of the administrative things that go in. We do the implementation plan for the go live, and we keep the customer in. We communicate with the customer on a regular cadence and let them know what's the health of the project, whether we are on time on budget for the go live. And we provide them a checklist as well. Like as you will see, it's kind of a collaboration with the customer and the cloud vendor that this implementation would be successful. And even after go live, these methods, we need constant monitoring for the consumption, how much each services are consuming, and whether we are going over the budget or not. And we do constant health checks to see if the platform is performing as well as we expected, or we need to tune those. So these are the high-level best practices that we follow. And with that, I will turn it over to Dean to talk about the cost.
Thank you, Dipankar. So one of the biggest motivators for people to move to the cloud is cost. And it's also one of the scariest parts about moving to the cloud, because for a lot of people, it can seem very hard to estimate and very hard to understand. So we'll kind of go through that quickly here. The main benefit, I guess, really is with the cloud, you pay for what you need when you need it. You're not stuck in a situation where you're buying infrastructure for future use. You're not having development services sit while development's not happening. With the cloud, you can spin up an instance and drop it when you're done working with it. And one of the benefits there is you can really drop your costs besides storage on the compute side. So if you're dropping the on-premises infrastructure, you're paying for less equipment. That equipment, obviously you had support that you needed to contract for. You don't necessarily need that anymore. Your utilities are going to drop because you don't have an on-premises server farm. And it gives you more budget flexibility because you're now contracting for a service which is operational versus CapEx. So kind of along the lines of spinning things up and dropping them when you don't need them, your speed to market, you can spin something up faster, you can get started on a project faster. You're spending less time implementing, and you're being more productive with that time. So that goes to salaries and hourly costs and contracting costs. You're spending less time with that and less money. Backups and disaster recovery, upgrade cycles, not something you really need to worry about anymore because that's part of your contract. But there are precautions. Dipankar, if you could go to the next slide.
Mm-hmm.
Pure experimentation is tempting with this. Let's spin something up, do something, and then shut it down. But it really is necessary to have a clear picture of what you're trying to do before you try to spin something like that up. Costs can spiral out if you're not keeping an eye on your volume, your movements, and what your compute cost is. And the good thing about that is before you get to the situation where you're ready to move things to the cloud, you really need to assess your data. You really need to assess how you're using it, and maybe look at things like retention. Analytics typically isn't a system of record, so your retention can probably be lower. Your need for daily loads versus something that's a little bit more real time, maybe that's going to be more sufficient. That'll help with data movement and compute costs. And kind of because if you don't keep an eye on it, it will fill with the volume of whatever you've got. So the cloud isn't set and forget. You've got to think about what you're putting out there first, and you've got to keep a very close eye on it. And there's ways to do that with costs. You can set alerts, and you should certainly have your own audit in place. And part of that too is security. So I think Mike's going to talk about that next.
Thanks, Dean. Appreciate it. Good morning, everyone. Can we go to the next slide, Dipankar?
Sure.
Okay, so security is an important aspect of cloud migration and cloud development. And one of the things that we need to understand about it is it's really, there's shared responsibility here between the vendor and between the client. So the vendor is really responsible for most of the infrastructure security, whereas the client is going to be responsible for all the user and access management. So again, it's not like you're going to go into a cloud situation and it's going to be magically taken care of to handle your security. So so a lot of this stuff has to be taken care of through these different practices of setting policies and controls and procedures along with the technology. So these are the base things that are used to protect your data while you're in the cloud, your data and your applications. So so we're going to go into some of the major aspects of best practices for cloud security. One of the first things I think that people forget about is that the users need to be trained. The users are the ones who are the point of access to these systems. And if they go in and and if they click on things in phishing or they don't protect their passwords, and that's the easiest way for people to get into the system, is to be able to hack somebody's credentials and get into the system that way. So training is essential for your end users and what they're going to be doing with the system and how they're going to be accessing it. One of the important aspects is that the cloud security is constantly changing. It provides you with a lot of different technologies to be able to secure your information in the cloud. So as you're going through and setting up your security, you need to keep an eye on what is coming down the pike and what new capabilities may be out there so that you can then take advantage of that as well. So, so keeping an eye on the future is always important. Encryption is essential to the data in the cloud, especially encryption in movement and at rest. Most of the cloud applications or the cloud infrastructure have encryption at rest. But when you're moving data in, depending on how you're moving data into the cloud, you could be going over open lines for the internet that they're passing your data across the internet. And that is where somebody can access it pretty easily then. So encryption is an essential part of all this. as I mentioned earlier, your security management solutions really include identity and access management. So what that means is you need to set up individual users in the system, and then you can set up groups of users that allow them to access specific applications or specific data within inside the cloud. So, and one of the best practices around that is we talk about having their least access. So you don't want to just start defaulting to giving people access to everything. What you want to do is you want to default to giving them access to what they essentially need, and then as their responsibilities grow, you can get into giving them more access as they need it. But again, we're trying to control access here, and we want to maintain the control of that. So we want to give the people a limited amount of access to just do what they need to do in the cloud. One of the most important aspects of cloud security is around IT audits. So, what this entails is periodically going in and checking out if we have intrusions. What are we doing for remediation on those intrusions? How are our endpoints secured? Are our users using the system correctly, and do we have any risk of the way that they're accessing the information? So, there's a lot of tools in the cloud that can help you manage this, but the important thing to remember is that it comes back to your responsibility to monitor it, because again, the client is generally responsible for user access to their applications and to the data. So that needs to be constantly monitored. So those are the main 5. I have another slide here that has another 5. Obviously, you want to make sure that your vendor has good security policies. Most of them do now. Most of them are HIPAA compliant or federal regulation compliant. So, you just need to check into their credentials and make sure that their security that they've got set up for the infrastructure is sound and it is credentials. Sorry, my dog is going crazy. But another aspect, again, is securing the endpoints here. So that is how people get into the systems, is the endpoints. So you want to make sure that you have it secured, because that's where hackers can also get in. So neutralizing threats in the cloud is important. And we need to make sure that we neutralize them and remove those threats, but also be aware of how they actually happen, and so that we can prevent them in the future, right? So we don't want to just neutralizing them is one thing, but preventing them and understanding how it happened is even more important, because then you can build policies and things around that to be able to help prevent them in the future. Again, this last one is a little bit generic, but it's you just want to make sure that you're protecting all your files and everything else, and that comes back to your security setups. The compliance requirement, is an essential aspect of security. And it really comes back to what are your business's regulations that you have to follow with the data that you're putting in the cloud. So you need to make sure, again, that the vendor has that security set up on their infrastructure side, and that you have the policies and procedures set up on your side to manage those compliance requirements that you have as a business. So that's what we have upon security, and I'm going to pass it back to Dipankar.
Thank you, Mike and Dean, for your excellent overview on the cost as well as security. So to wrap it up, as we already discussed, the cloud databases provide flexibility and the scalability, as well as gives the performance that was a problem with the legacy databases. Now you can have that flexibility on the fly, or you can kind of scale them whenever needed. So they also provide the security and the compliance that is required for any enterprise implementations. As you heard from Mike, security, one of the most important concerns that every customer has, and we take into account and whether the security and the compliance are implemented properly at the cloud vendor. And we also kind of give a cost estimate to understand, to help the customer understand what would be the cost of migrating to the cloud, and also enable them with dashboards, which most of the cloud providers provide, so that we help them train and analyze their ongoing needs. But as I mentioned before, and again, want to stress that this customers' pain points are all, that's where it all starts. Without customers' pain points, these kind of cloud implementations are not going to happen. And we at Ironside work with multiple vendors and partners. So we help each of our customers who we treat uniquely and find the right technology partner as well as a solution. So with that, I think that's the end of today's presentation, and we'll have some time for Q&A, but this is the schedule for our upcoming sessions on Take30. So we'll be happy if you could attend all or some of these, whichever you like. So now with that, we'll take questions, and I think Jeff is on the line to have the questions that are lined up.
I am. Good morning, everyone. So the first question we have this morning is for security responsibilities, what are the clients or your responsibilities versus vendor responsibilities?
So I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but essentially the vendor is really responsible for the cloud infrastructure security. So it's the network security, it's the actual physical security of the server or of the server farms locations and things of that nature. So they're all about securing their environment from outside hackers. But you know, when it comes to you setting up applications in the cloud and providing your users access, that becomes the client's responsibility to set up the policies and the procedures and the users to be able to allow the people access to the systems. So, and that's where it's a shared responsibility, because the reality is that the vendor's not going to know how to set up your users. And you know, the idea that I think that one of the most important aspects that I talked about earlier was that, you know, we want to set up least access for people so that we can always give them more access, but you know, if they need it. But to start off with, you just want to give them what they need and make sure that you have it locked down as best as you can, because it's easier to do that and manage that than it is to go back and try and remediate things where people already have access to too much stuff in the cloud. So, but again, the client is responsible for all their data in the cloud, securing that, as well as, you know, making sure the data is encrypted when it's being moved to the cloud. And then also, you know, just making sure that your applications are secured as well through user setup and access management. So.
Excellent, thank you. What cloud warehouse features are important when you're doing a migration?
All right, I'll take that. So we look for, like, obviously the security, one of the important aspects, but what are the scalability features, elasticity that the cloud vendor provides, whether it is flexible enough to add compute and storage on the fly, like when the queries that we are doing off from the databases are running into contentions, that it can scale up automatically based on some of the scaling parameters that are being set. So it does it on the fly, and it can also scale down based on the requirements there. So it can scale up for performance or scale out for concurrency. So these are some of the important things. We also look into whether, I mean, if the cloud provider has like a separation of compute and the storage that helps to add storage or the compute, whichever is necessary. We also look for, like, whether the cloud, they are agnostic. The cloud vendor is agnostic, so whether we can implement it in any of the cloud vendors like AWS, Google, or Azure. We also look for the feature right now, as I mentioned, that the data comes in different formats, and if the cloud vendor provides to be ingested natively, which means that they can store in the same database, the semi-structured data like JSON, Parquet, all that. All these features we kind of analyze and make the best recommendations. And I feel that like most of the cloud databases that we have are kind of technologies that are from the legacy, but just put in the cloud. But I have worked and used Snowflake, and that's kind of uniquely built for the cloud. Its its architecture, as well as it's simple to use, and that's what kind of my recommendation is when we choose the features.
Excellent, thank you. The next question is, where do I start in estimating cloud computing costs?
I'll take that since I talked about cost.
Okay.
And Dipankar, definitely jump in.
Sure.
The first thing to start with is look at what you're using now, and look at what's actually really necessary down the road. A lot of times, what's built and what's in place right now in terms of on-premises is built for future-proofness, I guess, is the best to say. So you may have actually built out enough storage, for the next 5 years. You don't need to start with that when you're going to the cloud. The best thing to do is take an audit of what you've got now, where you think you're going to be in the future. And there are estimating tools online, but we use estimating tools that I think are a little bit more robust. So, without sounding like a salesman, I think one of the best things to do is to get in touch with a vendor like us and start talking about what you're looking to do.
Yeah, and just to add to that, as we mentioned earlier, like we deep dive into customers, understand their environment, and then kind of try to come up with those size as to what is maybe the requirement for an ETL workload, or maybe what's the requirement for the dashboarding needs, or what there might be a data science workload that is required. So all these we kind of put together what Dean mentioned into kind of a dashboard, and it would give us the sum of the size. And again, we don't have to be exact because of the flexibility of the cloud. We can scale up or down as required.
Great, thank you both. I think we have time for one more question. And I guess this is a related question. What are some ways to control costs when just getting started?
I think the best way to control is again, do something that you know, do something, the process that you understand well, and something that you can kind of translate to, what the costs are currently to what the costs would be in the future. Because, it may be that you're just dropping the cost, or actually your upfront might be a little, it's going to be a little bit less because you're not provisioning anything. You're just going through and starting to pay for something monthly. When the cost benefits there, but the cost benefits too are what you're dropping off. So honestly, the best way to get started in doing that estimation and keeping those costs down is really to, again, like I said before, do an audit and understand what you're trying to do, and only spin up what you need. Like we said before, if you just need a dev environment, there's no need to spin up a QA or a production environment right away. Do your dev, do your experimentation there. Then I think you'll have a better understanding of what you would need for QA and production.
All right. I want to thank everyone and for attending and for presenting. And I think we're at the bottom of the half hour. So Debbie, I believe we're all set.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.